Obviously, intellection is one of those themes that's in the strategic thinking or the critical thinking domain, and it's something that goes on in people's heads. And if I were to kind of give a short definition, here's how I would describe it. It's a solitary or philosophical contemplation that deepens wisdom and understanding. It's really about people who like to think deeply about themes, and I find many times that these are people who sometimes need more time and more space in order to do that. And by space, I mean they might think best when they're alone, when it's quiet, when the door is shut, when the phone is turned off. They just need some time and space to think, but they really get clarity. I guess that's the word. I think as people think deeply, they come to greater sense of clarity about it. Some nouns that I might use, we typically try to think of nouns and adjectives. Obviously, thinker, I think of the famous sculpture of the thinker. That might be a good metaphor. Philosopher, discusser, muser, writer, blogger, people who have thoughts and like to kind of get the thoughts out of their heads. Adjectives that might go along with this: introspective, solitary, intellectual, philosophical, in-depth, reflective, musing, and to some degree intellectually driven. I kind of like to compare themes to other themes, and so sometimes I often talk about relator and woo, these two social themes, where woo is really about broad social connections, kind of the multiple connections, whereas relator is about more deeper connections and more selective connections. And to some degree, I think that's a good comparison to learner and intellection. Learner is more broad kind of thinking, a kind of broad interest, maybe not very deep, but someone who might know a lot of things about a little bit about a lot of things. Whereas intellection is a bit more like relator. It's more selective. It's more about deep. And so I'm sure Steve is going to tell us about some things that he has probably thought deeply about. Not about everything, but certainly some things. But it has this social implication of needing time alone. This does not necessarily mean that people with intellection are hermits or monks. It simply means they might need some time and space to be alone. We talk about the balconies and the basements of themes. I think to some degree the balcony, the value of intellection is the clarity that can come from intentional time thinking about something and understanding it deeply, not just knowing it. I think there's a difference between studying something to know it and kind of thinking about it deeply to really understand it more completely. I think sometimes the negative perception that can come from intellection is that sometimes it is often more about the social aspect, that it's people who might be in the room, but to some degree they might be disconnected because they're thinking about something. They may be there, but not really there because they are thinking so deeply. I think it's also good to think about the connection that this theme can have with other themes and the different dynamic that's created, and we'll talk a little bit about some of Steve's other themes. But for example, I can see how a person with intellection might benefit from also having the theme of discipline. Since it takes time to think, a person who has discipline might be more organized and might make more efficient use of their time. They might actually schedule time to think. That's how discipline could almost enhance intellection. There might be some people who have both intellection and activators. Thinking comes naturally for that person, but this theme could actually help convert some of that thinking into action. And so maybe you have intellection, you don't have activator, but you might benefit from a partner, from someone who could kind of convert some of your thoughts, give legs to some of your thoughts, and kind of the application of your wisdom and understanding. I think this doesn't happen as often, but many times I find many times when the people have intellection high, communication might be lower on their profile. And that, as I say all the time, that doesn't mean you can't talk. It just means your preference may be to think before you talk. Sometimes for some people it's I'd rather think than talk. But the challenge I think that people with intellection and many thinking thieves have is that your wisdom and understanding is wasted if it remains in your head. And so somehow it has to get out, and it needs to get out of your mouth. In Steve's case, it's gotten out of his pen as a writer. He's been able to share wisdom that way. Learner. I've talked a little bit about learner and intellection already, how those two themes could work together. The themes, learner's broad curiosity and interest could be a breeding ground for the deeper pursuits of intellection. So the initial interest that a learner had, the curiosity, could lead them to places where they want to drill deeper. So that's some of the theme dynamics. In terms of how frequent do we find this in top 5? Actually, 12% of people in our database have intellection in their top 5. So it's certainly not one of the most frequent, but it's not one of the most rare. I would say it's on the bottom third in terms of frequency. So a relatively rare theme. The most likely pairing, the two themes that that have the greatest probability to occur together in people's top 5 are intellection and input, which happens to be a pairing that Steve has. So he fits that model. The least likely pairing are significance, self-assurance, and woo. Those are often on the other part of the profile when they're there. Let's see, I'll just suggest one more thing. Sometimes we talk about themes as being in its raw form, and by raw we mean that's talent without education, experience, or others orientation. When it becomes more mature, it's invested in with education, experience, and it's more others oriented. So how I would define intellection in its raw form is basically my need for introspection keeps me from interaction. That's how raw intellection could look. I think so much that I'm not a very social person. That could be kind of raw. In its mature form, it says, my deep self-reflection is a prelude to a deep conversation with another person.